Welcome, everybody. Thanks for joining us one more time. I'm Jackson Felden here from Cloud Lunch and Learn. And today we have Lior just stand by here with me. And the presentation or the big subject for today is going to be billing infrastructure for developers, the hard way. I'm just wondering myself, what are the tips Lior will provide for us tonight? If you have any question, especially if you are new on the Cloud Lunch and Learn, if you have any questions, please feel free to type on the chat box. And then I already agreed with Lior. As the questions come, I will just jump and ask the questions kind of, straight away. Yeah, Lior, if you want to do a quick intro about yourself, and then I can share your screen and you can take over.
Yeah, sure, no problem. Hey, nice to see you. Nice to see you, Jackson, and everybody here. So I'm Lior. Today I'm Emberflow IO CTO. It's a startup, 2.5 years. And what we're actually doing there, it has to do with the slides that I'm going to share too. Previously, I was also in AWS and a few other cloud companies. And my experience, especially in the last 5 years, is about building metering and billing systems. Like, how
Okay.
would AWS build their own cost explorer? Like, how would platforms
Mhm.
report meterage usage and actually bill their customers in the end? That's
Okay. Yeah, interesting enough. Okay, Lior, let me just share your screen and then you can take over. Yeah, your screen is there. If you want to start present your slides. Yeah, that's great. Yeah, as I said, I will be here on the background monitoring the questions and answers. And if you need anything, let me know. Otherwise, yeah, the floor is yours.
Sounds great. And again, guys, don't be shy. Feel free to comment and we can take any questions. So, yeah, the title of this is Building
Okay.
Structure for Developers the Hard Way. Um, just recapping, really what I'm going to present is what I learned building my own, ourself, the metering and billing platform, but actually more than just discussing this topic with dozens of teams across different companies with their challenges about how to bill, how to meter accurately, how to bill, and all the challenges that comes with it. It's usually, and as you'll see throughout this presentation, it's usually something you just understand is going to be 100 times harder than what you initially thought. So that's kind of. And if we're looking on like why is it hard, why is it actually changing? What's the new challenges here? It used to be much easier. You would there was on-prem, you would buy 1 year deal, 3 year deal, whatever, and even after that, like more modern, you'll be able to pay like $10, $20 a month for a subscription. That was nice, right? They don't need to do anything very different, especially for developers. Like developers were not aware that much of any billing. It was different department in the organizations. Life were easy, but maybe unfortunately it's not the case anymore. Right? Developers are much more aware of how much they are, how well they need to meter to usage to see what's actually going on. Especially if you're when we're going to see a few examples for that. Almost every SaaS vendor today will give limits. We'll start from a free tier. You're going to be able to use X number of calls for free, and then next year, and they're in a package, and maybe usage based. So it became much more complex. And let's go over a few of those examples. Okay, and even if I take a simplified example, like not to start with the cloud provider, something simple that you see. Okay, this example is Launch Darkly. That it's a feature flag company, has packages, pretty straightforward. You can read it. Okay, $8 per seat per month sounds easy, right? But if you read the details, you actually see, oh, it's actually limited to this number, and there's all those details of usage there. Everything has to do that. All those vendors have to cap their usage somewhere, and that actually means for us that we need to build this in our product, right? Because somebody needs to monitor that. Somebody needs to understand that the customer is crossing those tiers. Okay. And if we're even going a step further, cloud provider, Azure, AWS, all have a very complicated billing, as we all know. We can talk about that too. But it's all usage based, meaning we really need to instrument the stack, every service. And this is just a little example of EC2 here, and then Lambda here, and then S3 here. All types of different pricing schemes, very detailed per instance type, how much memory, if it's Lambda, how much time it was, how X dollar for X number of million of requests. if you look, S3, there's tiers, right? So there's X number of storage for free, and then you have tiers. So it gets complicated, and more than that, it gets very accurate, right? There's a lot of need to really instrument what's going on. And this is true for all the 300 plus services in AWS. Each one of them has multiple price vector, multiple dimensions with very high granularity, right? So, and just to look at that as a trend that really goes with SaaS vendors today. This is just an example of this. I'm quoting here from OpenView partners that write a lot about usage-based pricing and why companies are moving to this. So this is about kind of like why it happened, and different examples of like companies, Snowflake, that charge you based on the compute resource, on the data volume. Datadog charges a lot of usage-based. We can drill down into this, but just an example is number of hosts you monitor, number of text messages, number of API requests. All of those are usage-based pricing, usage matrix that are evolving, and those companies are changing it over time, really tries to be more granular. And frankly, it is for a good reason. It is for being more transparent, more aligned with their own cost. So we can talk about all of why move to usage-based pricing, but this is not like the core of this this session. I'd be happy to share more details if you guys want to. So companies are moving to usage-based. That's kind of just a summary of seeing how many are moving, which actually is a huge difference every year. A very big adoption of also existing customers, right? So existing customer moving to usage-based, trying to make it a bit more aligned with their own goal, and so on. So that's kind of a big, this is all the problems that usage-based pricing, why usage-based pricing is hard. And we're going to talk about each one of those. I know there's a lot of data here. I'm going to kind of break it down through those elements one by one, starting from accurate usage tracking. So I'll just go over that just to keep it on our mind while we go through the examples and kind of think, what do we need to do to develop such a platform? Okay, so if we are developing a platform for our company of usage-based pricing, what do we need to do? Why is it hard? And why this is 100 times harder than what you initially thought? Okay, so it's all start from a really hard problem, which is accurate usage tracking. We really don't want, and I think, okay, I'll jump into this is really important, right? We really don't want our customers to be overcharged, come back with a question. We'll need to go into the details and actually understand we overcharge the customer. This is really bad, right? Really easy to lose customer trust, really hard to gain it back. There are a lot of internal stakeholders. So think about that, what we just saw on on the usage itself, even before billing, even before, and especially when it becomes the lifeline of the business, right? How much is being used? How much is the revenue? All of that becomes really important for everybody, for sales, for sales, for finance, for product, for the product people, for the engineering. Maybe we need to forecast how much more resources we will need. So this data becomes really important. Again, it was not as important when it was not all usage based, right? It was okay important, like people would care who's using what, but not to the point of what this is really becomes the lifeline of the business. Like this data is turns out who's the bigger customer, what's trending, what should we put more, and how do you do forecasting all of it? Okay. And so as we said about accuracy, it is a customer-facing data, even if not billing related, even if it's small. Customers are looking at this constantly, right? They want to get alerted. We can talk about this later, but this is really important for your customers. There's a lot of changes. Not all of them we can predict. The price change, the product lines changes, the deal structure change. We'll drill down a lot about commitments and prepaid and bundles that makes life harder. And it's all based on usage. Like it's all of that is not just, okay, pay me $1,000 and that's it. It's all based on how much usage you will have. Okay, so that becomes more complicated. As we know, exceptions are common. Okay, give this customer this terms and so on. So it can be common to have exceptions to the rules. And when we're going into more of a modeling part, right? So as a new product, how to actually price it, which data do you really need to use to do price modeling, to understand how will different price changes will impact which customers, right? So all of that, once you move to usage base, becomes super critical to you. Right? Otherwise, you just don't have the data to know that, and that could be very critical to all these decisions. And you can think about future projection, all the finance, revenue calculation, how will that go quarter over quarter, all this stuff, which is more finance. But yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so after we talked about, yes, this is hard and has a lot of different consumers inside the company and externally to the company. And you can actually see how this got a little bit out of focus, but fine. If you really go to like AWS best practices and how they look on multi-tenancy applications, you can really see that metering and billing here. You can see it's in cloud native applications. This is another pillar, right? You have Matrix, you have analytics, maybe you have some management and monitoring and onboarding services, but a really integral part is metering and billing. And it's pretty fascinating because I think you can see a lot of like different vendors approaching with Matrix and give you identity and onboarding and all this kind of stuff. But metering and billing is a bit forgotten and sometimes overlooked, mostly because this usage-based pricing and the movement to be so core to the business is actually pretty new. So we saw this metering and billing service being developed in many organizations over and over. Because of that need, because of something kind of like what monitoring was when they first started. Okay, so that's definitely a part of it. If you look in like platform engineering, so there's a platform team owning this service, developing it from scratch, trying to give, and we'll go over that, like how that looks like, but owning this service as a platform inside of an organization. Okay, so maybe to make it a bit more concrete, I would like to get an example. Let's try to build an end-to-end system and then kind of understand through an example why this is complicated, or maybe it's simple. We can try. Okay, so for this example, we're going to take EC2, right? It's a pretty I think everybody knows that, right? So compute, and I'm going to ignore a lot of things. So this is going to be a very simplified example. I'm only going to talk about this example. Okay, I have a EC2. I'm going to price it based on instance type and region. I'm not going to talk about data transfer, network, all this stuff, which will make it, of course, much more complicated, but I think it will be good enough. We will talk about, okay, you do have the usage, but also there's saving plans. We also need right? So saving plans, how you actually save. Can you do reserved instances? So it gets complicated also in the simplified version, but that's kind of the scope here. Okay, and of course, this is just for compute. We are going to have much harder with other stuff as well. Okay, so every time, this is how the infrastructure is going to work. Every time an EC2 instance starts or stop, we will send an event to the billing service, right? That sounds simple. Right? We want to send start, send stop, and we'll need to understand every time how much time this has been up and charge accordingly, right? You have a big table of how much the price is. You have start and stop. Sounds pretty simplified, right? Sounds pretty simple. Of course, there's complications, like what happens if you lose a stop event, for example. Right? If I only send a stop, but you lose a stop event, hey, I'm going to charge this customer forever. So maybe that's not super smart, right? Maybe we can add a timeout that if we don't allow a certain instance to run more than X time if we don't get a stop event. But that's actually cannot be done because EC2 can run forever, right? Some people run their EC2 for years. So start and stop is too simple. We'll need to stop. Maybe it's better, and actually that's how it works, to send kind of a heartbeat, keep alive, right? To send every minute or every 5 minutes that the instance is still alive, right? Because even because if we lose this stop event, we still know when was the last keep alive, so we'll be able to charge accordingly. Okay, and then pretty simple. But what happens also? So now this is pretty simple. So every instance keep on sending those events. The control plane knows it, insert to some database. There's some event scheme. Great. How do we add tagging, for example? Right. So you can add tags. You can add more metadata to the actual event. Sometimes the instance itself doesn't know everything about himself, right? So he doesn't know, sometimes doesn't even know which region he's on, but let's assume this is fine. But tagging is like a different service that you can tag instances. So you will need a different pipeline to add enrichment to this, right? So you have an events, they come, oh, now you need to add some tagging. So that's going to get more complicated to add more metadata that you will need down the road. Sounds pretty simple. So now we have events with in our database. What do we need to do with it? So this is pretty comprehensive, but look at what EC2 needs to prove to show their customers to really being able to understand this usage. Because again, usage, when you bill on usage, it makes it really important for customers to being able to explore, right, view and analyze the costs when there are spikes, how to associate which service it was, which region it was, right? So, and if we're switching for a second, right, and maybe just to show it, I'm not sure if everybody knows this example. Let me quickly show it here, right? So this is kind of like the AWS Cost Explorer and has a lot of, let me just refresh it to expire the session. Come on. Okay. So if we're looking on Cost Explorer, there's so many things you can do. Sorry about that a bit today. So I want to see which service it is. I can try to understand, do I have multiple accounts reporting to this, which region, which resource, a lot of stuff. And this is really important to gain confidence from the customers, right? So because if I don't give you this part of Cost Explorer, Usage Explorer, to be able to allow you to know who did what's that billing incurred because of, you lose trust, right? So you must have this trust with the vendor. So as your company, right, if you're doing database as a service or whatever, you really need to give your customers these abilities, right, to be able to not from the beginning, from this, not this one, okay, here, okay. So Cost Explorer, right, we really need to enable the customer to view and analyze the cost alerts. Okay, that's nice to view, but I want to get alerted every time maybe something happened. I can set a budget, or I can set this is all kind of AWS billing terms, but everyone has its own implementation of this. How can I set an alert? Send me an email if I'm over 100% day over day. How can I, if I'm over $1,000, right? So you need to have those alerts. And then this is super important, because if you don't give it those to the customers, they lose trust in, can they use such a usage-based system? Because the first thing the customer will say when you want to charge them based on usage, how can I know I'm not going to overcharge? How do I know that my developers are not overusing? So really important to enable them to automate those alerts, okay? Especially when it comes to something as complicated, there's a price estimators, right? So we can look on, there's all kind of tools that gives you to answer, like, how much are you going to use, how much that will cost you, all kind of estimations, all kind of calculators, okay? All of this is need to use. I won't get too much into this, but all of those need to use the data, right? This table data. And if we're getting to saving plans, which is going to be interesting, saving plans actually in AWS, maybe I'll do a short, let me show this for a second. Saving plans is actually much more interesting than you think, because it's not just, hey, I'm going to buy this and that. You're actually going to commit. So I'll show it a suggestion. So there is a recommendation that they output, right? And they're kind of telling you, maybe I'll enlarge that a little bit too for a smaller screen. You can upfront commit to a usage, and we'll probably talk about this a little bit more, but you're going to commit to spend X number of hours, which translates to N number of dollars, and they actually give you an estimate of how much you're going to save if you are pre-committing to this, okay? Can be hard to swallow, but all of those commitments are based on usage. So again, going back to the core, being able to have this really accurate and being able to drive from this those recommendations plan. Again, this is kind of your pre-purchase and amount of usage. Okay. Cool. And of course, that's all the consumer. We just talked about the customers. Now there's all the analytics for the internal use. As you know, as an EC2 owner, I want to understand who are the top customers, who's trending, who should I maybe send my account sales rep to talk with. So there's a lot of analytics for internal use. I need to understand it. Even does an instance type X is declining or has more users, which region, all this type of analytics. Right? So that's yeah. And of course, we don't get away from invoices, payments, tax, and projections, right? Those are kind of standard that we'll need to take care of, but they are becoming more harder because, again, they are dynamic, right? So what happens? I know this is not something we like to think about, but yeah, there was an incident, usage was wrong, we made a mistake, there was an invoice. How do we correct that? How do we do that? There's a lot of implications when the invoice is that dynamic. Okay. Well, yeah, so that was just a bit of an example that I showed about about what it means to do the commitment and being able to do usage commitments. Again, pretty fascinating. This is pretty new, I think, in most of them. But you can see it all across Datadog, AWS, Azure, all this type of commitments based on how much you're already using, how much you will use, and you're going to commit to that. And you can commit for all up front, partial up front, but they really automated the whole. If you commit to a spend, we'll be able to give you a discount. Okay, that's kind of how that works. By the way, any questions so far? Or I can just keep on going.
No, yeah, all good. Yeah, so far no questions. I think everybody's understanding well.
Cool.
Yeah, all good. Yeah, no problem at all.
Cool. And again, we talked about some other features. It's not just billing. What about price modeling? How much do we actually need to charge? That's a very hard question to answer if you don't get this data. Right? So you have a new service. What should it be? How much people are using today that will make sense for them? What will be the margin? Right? What will be our margin when we think about how to price it? So those tools, those analytics, they come really, really fast, right? Because product will ask, okay, now I'm going to have this new product, or I want to change that, and we want to give also an API. Do we quote it? Like, how many APIs do we need to give away? So that comes pretty fast. And also a bit more of a soft, salesy kind of processes of, I have free users. Who are the free users that are actually using the product? Maybe I can convert them to be paid. So a lot of signals coming from this usage data, again, just as the number of consumers for the usage and billing. Okay, so this is actually kind of going into an implementation, a very, very simplified implementation schema here. I'll take a zip. So I took this example from an AWS blog about building a third-party SaaS metering and billing integration. Very simplified. And I think if you'll give a developer 2 days, what will you do? That's probably what you will come with. I'll probably look here just to explain. So we just to anchor it a little bit. We have the SaaS application. In our previous example, it was EC2, right? That emits events. Here it emits the billing event, like start, stop, or number of hours used, or an API call, right? So every event that happened, it sends as a billing event that gets stored into a database. There's a different flow here that kind of creates that customer, okay, like assigns the right plan to the customer. They call it the tenant onboarding ingestion. That's basically much setting up the customer, okay? Which makes sense. You create a customer, you give it a plan. Is it this plan or that plan? Fine. Okay, so going through this, so there's EC2, billing event. You save it in some database, right? The events database. And you're publishing it to some, in this example, they gave an example, okay, I publish it to Stripe, for example, okay, publish to a billing provider. Sounds simple, sounds that this is going to work. There's also a step here, which seems easy, but it actually, so one big part of it is the aggregation, because events, if you just send them, that's going to be very hard to publish to a billing provider. You really need to do aggregations, right? Because let's take again EC2. There's many EC2 start and stops. If you're going to try to do like every day to go ahead and scan this database and send this to a billing provider, it's going to be very error prone. And we're going to talk about this error prone and why. But think about that again. Number of API calls, number of S3 bytes read and write, right? If we won't be able to aggregate them before really doing further actions, and this can be also further downstream, it's going to be very hard for us to handle. Just the performance of that will be very. So again, this will work for super simplified form, and we'll get in a second to why that doesn't really fly. So again, in this example, they give this example of there's a SAS app here, right? So this one is being broadcasting events into a event bridge, which is a queue, basically. Like this is the queue, the event bridge, the topic that billing events are being published on. There's a Lambda function that processes this event and save it into a DynamoDB table. Okay. There is an aggregation that runs all the time. Okay. And then once every few minutes, every day, so this runs like every 5 minutes to aggregate, and once a day, go ahead and push to Stripe. Again, it sounds like this is going to work, but this really can't solve real life problems. It sounds again that's what the developer will think it can do in a few days. That's really not going to work. Now, why? If you reason with what we just saw, how does it do cost explore? Right? How do we actually do the granularity per dimension, per region, per that? How we actually query? So we cannot query this. This was nice, but we cannot. So here we just kind of aggregated the number of, let's say, EC2 hours or EC2 hours. But if it really gets into region and instance type, and I want now to run this cost explore, right? Show me per day, over month, over 2 months, 3 months, how much was the usage, how much was the billing per day. This is not going to fly. Right? This is not the right structure. You won't be able to query and show this data fast enough. The data model is just not there, right? So cost explorer, commitments. How can we actually know what should, right? We saw this. We're going, oh, this is how much you use in the first 30 days. You can save this and that. How can we get this data if it's just thrown in some DynamoDB table that's being, the infrastructure is just not there. It's not aggregated correctly. You won't be able to do that. There's no tagging support. How does other services enrich that in real life? That's not going to be that simple. Right? This is actually going to be like with enrichment and adding some more. And this event aggregation actually will need another database that is more right for the cost explorer, being able, to be able to more granularity. So going to be more and more services, more and more databases, each one for different functionality, right? And of course, as we just said, this is just pushing to a billing provider, but we mentioned a few minutes ago, we want also to push to analytics. We want to push to projections. We want to enable this data for machine learning. So there's going to be multiple consumer, not just one Stripe at the end, okay? Cool. Alerts. We talked about how customers can define alerts, how we can define alerts if we see the billing is dropped or there's no way to do alerts here, right? So you need to develop all of this. Again, have another consumer, maybe run some rules, create this rule, create this model. So very simplified. And something we don't think about, and it's how we handle incidents, right? How do we handle wrong meter reportings? How do we fix those things? You actually cannot do that if you already aggregate every few minutes and then send to a billing provider. You cannot fix this. Very problematic, right? So things will always fail. You always need to take care of failures to meter reportings that are wrong. It's going to be hard. Okay, so coming back to this, I think we kind of looked through all the why billing is hard. Yeah, I think this is we pretty much went over that. Let me also maybe touch a bit of a point. We saw this architecture diagram before, that we saw there's monitoring and then there is metering and billing. And I wanted to highlight this fact, which comes, developers usually start with that, like what's the difference between monitoring and metering, which sounds a bit same, but there is a huge difference, which is the impact, right? Observability and monitoring is what happens if logs are missing? What happens if your CPU usage monitor is missing, or a log line? Usually nobody cares, right? It's just a monitoring, a hiccup. Nobody cares. Nobody will know probably, and fine. What happened But if the usage data, if the billable usage data is missing, that's bad, right? So, and again, it's not about you losing bills. It's not about losing money, which is wrong, but it's not the worst. Worst is your customer is looking at the data, the billing data, and see missing data. It see the wrong data there, and that's really, really bad. Okay, so different story, different systems, right? So for accurate billable usage instrumentation, it's a very different system than observability and matrix. So you cannot put your Grafana into it, look at it in the end of the month, saying, "Hey, Grafana, how much was that for this customer?" Just not the same SLAs, not the same agreements. Okay, so this is why it's at least 10x harder than what you thought. Um, I think I touched a little bit on those, but I want to dive deeper. So system failures are imminent. They'll always happen. And you really need to design the system to be able to re-ingest, to being able to retake the data, because in the end, you must show the correct billing data to the customer, right? That's the end result. In monitoring system, you do not, right? If something is wrong 2 weeks ago, nobody cares. In billing system, you really want to fix those 14 days of data, and you really want to make it immutable, because you don't want other people to mess with this data. So it's a bit of a tricky, and we can dive a little bit into that too. So we ingest historical data, fix historical data, and it is not easy to scale. This performance to show accurately and fast what are the right usage over time, because people are going to use this on, let me see 6 last months of data, right? When you're going to a contract negotiation, let me see the 6 last months of usage, right? So very important to have performant system, and you'll start building those ETLs that kind of aggregates this. And that's usually what a developer will do. Hey, we have a big events table. Great, let's run a daily aggregate that takes this into a different table, which sounds great, but also is very error prone, right? So this ETL can fail. How do we fix that? Can we rerun it? Are we sure we are not duplicating data? We'll touch about this too. Disputes. All of common pitfalls that I saw is also like coupling usage and billing. So many times people are just have a table of billing instead of usage, and they kind of already bill and meter in the same table, which is very wrong and very hard to decouple later on. So again, really decouple usage, which is the developer and the engineering that push data, and then there's a subset of that is actually for billing, right? So really important to differentiate the two models: engineering that handles metering and usage, and products, sales, all those finance that handle billing data. Two different systems, two different repositories in a way that looks on different things, and very important to define. Multiple downstream systems, so we saw Stripe, but in the real place, there's feeding it into multiple places, your own data warehouse, NetSuite, Database Marketplace, and so on. And there can be also upstream systems. So how you define those customers, what are the plans, which promotions, all this kind of stuff. So really the heart of that. Okay. And maybe this is, if I can, summarize a lot of what we talked about, some real good design principles, and we can unpack most of them. So decoupling metering from billing. I think this is a concept we saw with the successful implementations about how the engineering team define matrix. They want to accurately meter usage. And later on, the product takes that and make it into a billable items, right? Because it's not a one-to-one. Maybe you want to expose also usage, which is not billable to your customers. That's totally possible, right? You want to show how many API calls they made or how many times they logged into the service, even if you don't bill today, because you might bill about this tomorrow. You don't know. And this way, when the engineering actually defines those metrics to be followed, then it gives more flexibility to the product team later on, product and sales team later on, to do price modeling, to understand, to discover different dimensions to price on. Okay, so very important to decouple the two, especially because usage events are facts. It's what happened, right? It's not about an invoice, a promotion. It's what happened, what the system saw that happened, and has different APIs and all of that, right? The prices and billing can adjust and are changing all the time, but usage events from last month, again, unless fixed by some incident, those are facts. Those are immutable. It's an append-only system. Okay, so that's very important. Prices and a current running invoice can be recalculated, can be changed, can add a promotion, but not usage events. Yeah, and what I mentioned is, different end users using a superset of billing metrics. Yeah, about the accuracy part, really important to follow this two very related items, which basically is idempotency, right, and deduplication. So all the system and all the different steps, there will be multiple steps, multiple data pipeline problem. You really must do them idempotent, meaning you can run it again and again, and there will be no change in the data, right? So you can run the same message, the same usage event. You can send it multiple times, but you won't count it twice. Okay, that's the important part. And again, because things will fail, each part of your data pipeline will fail. You really must be able to re-ingest, resend usage events, because sometimes you don't even know. You have no idea when the incident came, which exact usage events reached the system and which not. Maybe 80% did, and there was some intermediate. You really need to save the option to rerun everything and to expect the right answer at the end. Right? So idempotency is a really critical. And a part of that, deduplication. So how we enable those source systems to replay data. And so this idempotency is more of your data pipeline, so you can rerun all the time. And deduplication is to allow the source system that send those events to be able to send again, right? So if they send an event, they're not sure if it's there or not, to be able to send the same event without duplicating it, right? So you can have a unique ID, you can have all kind of ways to achieve it, but really important to have a deduplication method here. Okay, auditability, which basically means you must preserve the original user record. So it's not enough. Actually, in the simplified version that we saw of the aggregation, it was actually deleting in this blog post the original records, which is very bad. Because you really need to be able to audit. If a customer calls, to really being able to show him when was that coming from, what was the ID. So at least, for a few months, you really, and probably a year, you want to keep the raw format of the events to be able to trace back the original events. Okay, so that's traceability, auditability is very important. And even, for example, for an SMS, you want to show a call record, right? So if you're telling the customer used 600 SMSs, he can ask for the call record, show me who did I send those 600 SMSs. So it's not just accumulating the amount of SMS sent, but it also need to keep the audit. Okay, and scaling, it's really sometimes not easy to think about. Sometimes it starts from, just show me every 6 hours, every 12 hours. But developers, especially internally, like if you're building the platform service, it's actually very hard to work if you're not allowing real-time view. And so today, even like in AWS and some other cloud providers, the billing data is not immediate. It's not real-time. We see a lot of, it's going to the path that you cannot really not do it. To really allow, especially when new products are being onboarded, you want to start an EC2, you want to see it right away in the billing, in the usage scheme. So we see more and more people want to show it in real time, and it makes much more sense. And then it's also a bit different way to architect that. So we'll definitely go with the real time approach. Usually you get to it at the end. So, okay. How long do we have? Okay, cool. I think we can go with that. Let me talk about this. I think this is a pretty core concept of we saw this SaaS application sending events to this event bridge, and how does application really report usage? We saw a lot of examples, some, and I just want to highlight a few. When you're thinking about this, how are you reporting usage? So it can be based on logs, right? A lot of applications, this is kind of like if I don't want to touch the system, I can do some downstream process, define the pattern. Right? So every time I see start or stop, I can convert it into a billing event and send the event to the billing service, which, some people are doing this. So based on logs, there could be a messaging. So this is more mature, that there is some platform service inside the company. Somebody built an SDK that you do .send billing, and this sends the event into Kafka or to SQS. That is later being consumed by the billing service. yeah, that's a really good example for this kind of architecture. And some are going with database queries, right? So once a night, um, there's a process that runs, query the application database about the events, and tries to downstream the it generates from this the meter events, right? So a process wakes up every hour, every day, per customer, per dimension, scans and send that downstream. Each one comes with its own problem. Um, yeah, I just want to highlight a few. If it's based on log, it's really easy. I mean, that's the most horrible thing that happens is somebody change a log line, which is unstructured, so somebody can change it very easily. Somebody changed the log4j format, and that's it. I mean, you are out of billing until the time you fix this up. So that's really clear that it's really not great to work like that. But it is a good start. So sometimes when people start with a POC, you just need to do something downstream. It's a valid approach. Messaging. So really need to make sure that idempotency is being kept, and it's a once and only once processing. Yeah, it sounds trivial, but hard to achieve sometimes. And really, it's not enough, right? The once and only once processing, again, incidents happens. So all the issues we said about idempotency is really, really important. Okay. Really need to make sure we're not undercounting, overcounting, saving the row events. Those are things to watch for. And database queries, all this. The main problem here is, again, if the job failed, how do we recover for that? Do we know which rows are already aggregated or not? Sometimes can be really tricky to gather. Okay. Yeah, just diving a bit into this scale. As we saw in Cost Explorer, being able to show last 12 months, month-over-month usage, this font is a bit large, but it's really hard to do, right? It can be tens of millions of events for a single query. If you run it against, Athena, Redshift, it's really not a great custom user experience to be able to do that. And if you just save the row events and not do intermediate aggregation, it will just not work. In the end, it will just not scale to be, the latency will not be good enough. Because, again, showing top 10 customers on a specific region, last 6 weeks, hard. And going into some other problems, for example, I want to look on monthly active uniques or how many unique servers were in that time. It's costly, right? So doing all of this on raw data is practically impossible. Okay, so we mentioned a little bit about the SDKs and in the messaging, like how people are going with it. So this is very important, like to create SDKs that services in the org can use to send this data to make it, as a platform service, really important to make that standard, right? So not everybody will do it in their own way, especially when those SDKs are not stupid. They're not just calling an API. Usually they will do some kind of a retry. Maybe there's exponential backoff, batching events, async events logic, like how I'm not blocking the current queue with the current call with sending async. So there's some good stuff that you can encapsulate as an SDK. Yeah. And just going into some more hardware, we just talked about very simple sum, like you can sum the meters. There's some actually much harder use cases. How do you look like on storage, which is gigabytes per hour, kind of the average? And how do you do unique? I'm not sure. I don't want to get too much into it. It's going to be a more interesting problem, but just maybe 1 minute here. So S3 storage and many infrastructure pricing about storage is the average storage used throughout the month. So it's not just every if you use 10 gigabytes for 15 days and 0 afterwards, you'll just pay for 5 gigabyte hours. Sometimes hard to understand. That's one. And maybe a nice example for a unique, we see a lot of companies that are trying to price based on unique server count, like Datadog, how many unique server you had, or monthly unique sessions, or monthly unique users, which is not a sum, because if you think about it, every event that comes to the system, you need to make sure you didn't already counted it for the entire month, right, for the entire period. So if you're looking, for example, on segment, you can send users, like to track users across the month, but it doesn't matter how many times across the month you send it. You only want to track it as one. Okay, so just an example. So this, for sure, if we're looking on the simplified version, just doesn't fly. Okay, so being able to do duration and unique and max, all kind of different aggregations and usage, how a different usage being metered is not straightforward. Okay, so I think that's kind of what I wanted mainly to share, how not easy it is, and maybe go back to uh, this to finalize. I think we saw that. Again, it's the accurate usage metering is definitely a big part and kind of drives the entire the entire list afterwards, and the functionality that you need to provide to customers in order to feel confident about this billing, this that it is accurate usage billing and they are not getting overcharged. That's pretty much it.
Okay, thanks for the great presentation. Yeah, I'm not a developer myself, but it's interesting to see all the controls you can add into the system. Yeah, interesting enough. Yeah, we haven't got. I think you explained too well. We haven't got any question on the chat box. And yeah, I just want to say a big thank you for all your time and all the knowledge you just shared with us in the last 1 hour or so. And for everybody watching us from home, please don't forget to check our website for our upcoming session. We are always here every Wednesday. I will paste the website on the chat box now in a few seconds. Okay, Lior, if you don't have anything else to add, again, thanks very much for your time, and thanks everybody for watching us from home.
Thank you very much.
Okay, see you next time. Thank you. Bye bye.